Thank you, Cindy. Well, it really is special for me to be here this evening. And I want to begin by thanking Cindy. You are all very fortunate, and I'm very fortunate to have someone like Cindy as president. I need to speak up. Okay. But when you think about last night, who got me and got my wife to Milwaukee? Cindy. And who brought us back safely in a driving rainstorm? Who got home, what, about 12:30?
I got home last night about 11, actually.
Oh, okay.
I did not know until today that your wife was kind of hiding in the back seat and almost lost it when I said, I can't even see the lines on the road.
It was an experience. So I want to thank Cindy for what a wonderful person she is. Thank you. Great.
There we go.
So as Cindy mentioned, I've written a number of books on the Civil War, starting off with brigade-level histories on the first New Jersey Brigade, the Philadelphia Brigade, then moved over toward Gettysburg, and that led to my first maps book, which was the Maps of Gettysburg, which to this day, as you can imagine, is the best-selling book of the series. My goal is to graph and to illustrate every campaign in the Eastern Theater of the Civil War. And some have asked, well, what about the Western Theater? And I'm actually working with a young man who is doing the Shiloh campaign. And so he is doing the text, I'm doing the maps for him. And it's it's almost, I don't say impossible, it sounds pretty bad. But it's very difficult for one person to do both. And so I'm unusual in that regard. And I thank my wife for teaching me how to use a graphing program to be able to do it. But for many of you, you know that my books are in color, and most of them will be about 125 pages, with the text on one side, the map on the other. And Fredericksburg is the most recent one. First Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, Mine Run / Wilderness, Mine Run, Bristoe Station. Also, the Wilderness, now Fredericksburg. Spotsylvania is finished. Cavalry at Gettysburg is finished. Working on Petersburg. And my wife doesn't like when I say this, but I'm trying to live long enough to finish the whole series. So what I'm doing tonight is talking about Fredericksburg. Not because it's my favorite campaign, but it's because it's the most recent book in the series. It's an interesting campaign, and most people, when they think about it, concentrate on only half of the battle, and that is the battle for Marye Heights. But most don't understand that to the south, there was a lot of fighting very early between Reynolds' Corps, First Corps, we'll see, and Stonewall Jackson, who almost defeated Lee early in the battle. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Marye Heights. We'll talk about the campaign. If you have any questions, I hope you'll ask them. And I'm a pointer, and of course I didn't bring my laser pointer, and I've enlisted my wife to advance the slides, so we'll get through this. Please, Maestro. Okay, so let's put this in perspective. Obviously, you have the Army of the Potomac has had not a long history, but since 1861, it has been engaged in a variety of campaigns, most under George McClellan. And right before this campaign, we had obviously the Maryland campaign. It was Lee's first invasion of the North. Some would ask, what was the high watermark of the Confederacy? And many will say Gettysburg. Others will say no, it was really Antietam for a variety of reasons. Lee retreated back into Virginia, and Lincoln was very happy about that because he could then provide the preliminary draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. He was looking for some sort of Union victory to be able to do that. But that was not what he was really looking for. He wants to end the war. And at this point in the war, how do you end the war? You take Richmond. McClellan wasn't going to do it. He was prodding McClellan to continue the campaign, to move into Virginia, to pursue Lee, defeat Lee, and take Richmond. McClellan was not interested for a variety of reasons, and I don't want to fault McClellan. But in early November, Lincoln had had enough and removed McClellan from command. And who was he going to put in his place? He didn't have a whole lot of options, and he settles on Ambrose Burnside, commander of the Ninth Corps. This is a man who had no interest in commanding the Army of the Potomac. Unlike McClellan, unlike Meade, unlike Hooker, who really wanted to command this army, he had no interest. And it was a matter of Lincoln encouraging him to take command. And he was able to do it in a very interesting way. He said, look, if you don't take command of this army, I'm going to give it to your arch enemy. And who did Burnside dislike more than anyone else in that Army of the Potomac? Hooker. So he's saying, I'm not going to serve under this man, I'll take it. But he did it reluctantly. He's got a good army. His numbers have increased to almost 125,000 men. And they're in pretty good spirits because they had finally bested Lee at Antietam, and they're ready for further action. The problem that any commander of the Army of the Potomac has is Abraham Lincoln and Henry Halleck. And you can say that they really overstepped their bounds, that no other commander-in-chief ever took as strong an interest in the strategy of the Civil War of his army, and yet I think it had an important outcome on the war. And so as soon as Burnside is placed in command of the Army of the Potomac, it becomes, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to take Richmond? And there were some discussions, many discussions, and they finally settled on a command or on a campaign that was going to cross the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg and ultimately drive south to Richmond. Next, please. Obviously, he's up against Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, who has never suffered a setback, had his first setback at Sharpsburg or Antietam. And his army has grown. You know, many of the men who were, many of the men who were supposedly in his army at Antietam had fallen by the wayside. There were a lot of straggling going on. So he's up to 78,000 men, almost 80,000 men, about the same size as what he's going to command at Gettysburg. But what's interesting is he does not have his entire command with him. Next, please. So, is that sharp, the map? I should put my glasses on.
It's a little bit blurry.
It's a little blurred. Let's make it a lot in focus. Is that better? Somewhat? Okay, good. All right. So, here's Fredericksburg. Here is the Union Army driving south. It is the beginning of November. McClellan has been removed from command, I think it was the 2nd of November. Burnside put in his place. So he's not going to waste much time starting to move south. But look at Lee's army. They're in red. Longstreet's corps or wing is around Culpeper Courthouse. But where is Stonewall Jackson? Where is the other half of Lee's army? All the way north. Still in the Shenandoah Valley. Part of this was logistics. There was not enough forage for the horses down in this area. But it's a problem, as you can imagine, because look what's happening. Union Army is coming south. You only have about maybe 35,000 men against how many? Potentially over 120,000 men. Quite a mismatch. Even Lee isn't going to be successful with this kind of mismatch. And Stonewall Jackson says, look, when you need me, I will bring my corps south as quickly as I possibly can before the Union Army begins to cross the Rappahannock River. Next, please. So at this point, and we're talking again, now it's toward the end of November. Look at the Union Army. Burnside is now opposite Fredericksburg. You have Longstreet has moved from Culpeper Courthouse, and Longstreet is now on Marye Heights and some of the other heights that are opposite Fredericksburg. And this is when Stonewall Jackson is going to begin his march. And we know that he called his men, or it's called the foot cavalry. But they were marching over 25 miles a day. And what's so interesting is many of them were barefoot. But they are going to rejoin Lee's army fairly quickly, as you can see, in 6 days. And you might say, well, why isn't Burnside crossing that darn river? Well, we all know that, right? It's all about pontoon bridges. Because he could not ford the Rappahannock River, he needed pontoon bridges in order to cross his army. Next, please. Before we get into that, Stonewall Jackson initially is not at Fredericksburg. He's going to be dispersed all along the Rappahannock River. Why? Because Lee did not know exactly where this crossing was going to occur. And he could not afford to concentrate his army at Fredericksburg and find out that, for instance, the Union Army is going to be crossing at Port Royal. So he's going to initially disperse his army, especially Stonewall Jackson is going to be to the south. Again, Longstreet's men are going to be up opposite Fredericksburg. Next, please. So the issue is the pontoon boats. And we had a very interesting discussion about Henry Halleck, because Burnside needs about 80 pontoon boats to form that bridge. He can't order them up. He's got to rely on Henry Halleck, the General-in-Chief, to order them up. And Henry Halleck basically says, not a problem, I'll get them to you in a very short period of time. And the question is, as we were discussing, did he have something against Burnside? Or were there problems, logistical issues, that prevented these pontoon bridges or boats from getting from further north around Harper's Ferry and other areas, the upper part of the Potomac River, south to Fredericksburg? There were logistical issues in terms of where they were located. The transportation systems, there were not enough mules. Many of them were finally thrown into the Potomac River and floated down. But ultimately, the bottom line is it's going to take weeks for them to arrive. And we do know that Halleck really did overestimate when those boats were going to come. And also we know that there are telegrams from Halleck to Burnside saying, I'm ordering those boats today. He didn't order them for several days later, for whatever reason. And again, it may have been some personal animus, not certain about that. But those boats are not going to arrive in time for Lee to cross the Rappahannock River before Burnside to cross the Rappahannock River before Lee is able to concentrate his men. And that's going to be the downfall of Burnside. Next, please. Okay, so let's talk about the battlefield. How many of you have been to Fredericksburg? Let me see some hands. Okay, it's a very nice battlefield. Much of it is well preserved. Major portions, as you know, are not well preserved, and it's a tragedy. But you have, on the Union side, you have Stafford Heights. And on Stafford Heights are about 150 long-range cannon. On the opposite side of the Rappahannock River are a series of hills from Telegraph Hill to the north to Prospect Hill to the south. And these are the hills that Lee is going to occupy. And in between is called the Lansdowne Valley. It is open, and any troops that are going to cross this open area have the potential to be blasted into smithereens by the Confederate artillery, which are deployed on the high ground parallel to the Rappahannock River. These pontoon boats, when they finally arrive, are going to be placed in 5 different areas. You're going to have 2 bridges to the northern portion of Fredericksburg. You're going to have 1 in the southern area of the town of Fredericksburg, and you're going to have 2 others further downstream. The engineers are going to be protected by members of Zook's brigade, and against them will be William Barksdale's Mississippians. And you may know of William Barksdale. He was a real fire eater, former legislator. Lee needed him to buy time. He needed time for Stonewall Jackson to come up from the southern portions of the Rappahannock River and redeploy on Prospect Hill. And so they would be ready for this particular attack. Next, please. Well, here it is, December the 12th. And the engineers are going to begin the bridge building activities. And almost immediately, as you can see them, some of them are lying on the bridges, they are struck down by the Mississippi bullets that are flying into them. And these engineers, they're engineers, they're builders, they are not fighters. And they drop their tools, and they immediately leave the bridge surfaces, as you would expect. And no one expected they're going to pick up a musket and start firing across the Rappahannock River. Next, please. And so, what do you do? Well, Zook's brigade is going to open fire on Fredericksburg, trying to drive these snipers away from these buildings. Unsuccessful. There's some limited artillery fire. Unsuccessful. So what do you do if you are General Burnside and you need to finish these bridges so you can cross your army to drive Lee away from Fredericksburg? What do you do? Well, what he did was those 150 cannon, open fire, thinking he's just going to blast those sharpshooters into oblivion. And so they are going to fire for about 4 hours. Next. And by the time they were finished, there was not a building in Fredericksburg that was not destroyed or damaged. And the irony of all of it was the cannon fire ends, the bridge builders get back into their position, and the sharpshooters start opening fire again. Where were they? They were in the cellars. And so very few of them were injured during this cannonade. So we have an issue. What are you going to do now? Well, next please. What is finally determined, and it was not Burnside, bless you, that actually came up with this idea, was the first successful amphibious landing in U.S. history. Putting men from the 7th Michigan, from Hull's brigade, onto these pontoon bridge boats. They could hold anywhere from 20 to 25 and row as fast as they can across the Rappahannock River. They're going to be shot at by these sharpshooters. Many of them are going to be killed or wounded, but they're going to continue to paddle like mad across the Rappahannock River until finally they get to the opposite shore. Next, please. This is a close-up of the town. You can see the partially completed bridges, and the specks are Union infantrymen. You can see in red, these are sharpshooters forming this line, trying to stop any of these men, these Union forces, from crossing. Eventually they get a toehold. And then more and more Union troops are going to cross. The 19th Massachusetts is going to cross. The 20th Massachusetts is going to cross, and there's going to be fighting in the street. Next, please. What's interesting is you can walk right here at the intersection of Sophia and Hawk. You can look across, you can see the Chatham House, you can see where all those guns were, you can see where that bridge was located, and you can see where these men are going to push inland along Hawk Street toward Caroline Street. Now here's where it gets difficult, because it was supposed to be the 7th Michigan that not only crossed the Rappahannock River, they were going to continue to, they were supposed to push forward and drive these Confederates further into the town. You're the commander of the 7th Michigan. What do? You've already lost a number of men. You got the 19th Massachusetts behind you. You've got the 20th Massachusetts behind you. Are you going to send your men forward knowing that they're going to get beat to heck? No. He says, I'm not budging. And it forces the 20th Massachusetts, the Harvard Regiment, many young men from Harvard University, to march up Hawk Street, and they know what's in front of them. They didn't know exactly how bad it was going to be. Next, please. But all hell's going to break loose as soon as they get to that intersection. They're going to be hit from every flank, from both flanks. They're going to be hit in front. They're going to be hit in the rear. And a number of companies are badly decimated. But ultimately, more and more reinforcements come up, and they're able to drive the Confederates further into the town. Next, please. Hull's, the Philadelphia Brigade is going to cross. And Barksdale has basically done what he needed to do. Lee needed him to buy time. He bought plenty of time for Lee to concentrate his army opposite the Rappahannock River. And he is ordered, Barksdale is ordered to withdraw your Mississippians. Now, Barksdale is a tough cookie, and he was not budging. He felt had a job to do. His men were full of fight, and he said, no, I'm not pulling out. And he was actually, his division commander, Lafayette McLaws, actually threatened him with court-martial. You will pull your troops out of their position, or you will be court-martialed. Finally, he agreed to it. So by the end of December the 12th, you're going to have Burnside's army, for the most part, across the Rappahannock River. They're now ready for December the 13th. They're ready for the great and big attack on Lee's army. But where are you going to attack? Well, William Franklin commands the Union left flank, which is right here. And he's meeting with Burnside. It's in the evening of the 12th of December. And he says, listen, Ambrose, I got an idea. Give me 60,000 men, and let me launch these 60,000 men across this open field against Stonewall Jackson's flank, or his Lee's flank, and I will drive them off of that hill. Now, he didn't know, I mean, if you look at it, there are a lot of Confederate troops here. Each of these is a brigade. Each of these is about 1,500 men or so. So he couldn't see all of these Confederates because it's fairly well wooded, but he could see the Confederate artillery. And he knew that if he's going to cross in broad daylight, these artillery pieces are going to blow his columns into smithereens. So that's why he says, I need to do it before it gets light. If I can get them across this open area and right around here by daylight, I'm going to win. You give me enough men, I'm going to defeat Lee. And Burnside says, yeah, let's do it. I will send you orders in the next few hours. 11 o'clock comes, no orders. 12, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Meanwhile, Franklin is not sleeping, as you can imagine. He's waiting for the orders. And as each hour progresses, he's getting more and more frantic because he knows that sun is going to come up fairly soon and his men are going to get slaughtered. Finally, about 7 o'clock in the morning, an aide finally reaches him. Apparently, there were problems with the orders being transcribed in a timely manner, and so Burnside just scribbles his orders on a piece of paper, hands them to the aide. It was Burnside's aides who were supposed to be, creating these very clear orders, but it was taking them too long, so Burnside just scribbles something down, gives it to the aide. The aide, of course, gets lost, can't find Franklin, and finally, when he finds him, it's broad daylight, and 60,000 men? He talks about one division, about 5,000 men. What happened to the 60,000? Never explained. So you can imagine Franklin's been up all night. He's thinking about how he's going to launch this attack, and now he gets orders for one division attacking. So he's very frustrated. Bless you. Next, please. So Burnside really had three options. Once he crossed the Rappahannock River, one option, he had lost the element of surprise. So he could obviously have simply said, you know what, this isn't going to work for me. I'm pulling back. It is the beginning of December. What do troops usually do in December and January? Are they fighting?
Winter quarters.
Winter quarters, not this guy and not now. But he could pull back. What's Lincoln going to do if he pulls back?
Fire.
He's going to put Hooker in command, so forget that stuff. He could move around Lee's right flank, try to flank him and either hit him in the flank or drive down to Richmond. Or he could take his large army and try to bludgeon Lee. And he decides that's what he's going to do. Next, please. So, I've already talked about this. You can see even more of Stonewall Jackson's troops have come up. Okay, next, please. Okay. So, he gets the orders at 7:30 for one division. For whatever reason, Franklin decides he's not going to send one division. He's going to send John Reynolds' entire First Corps. He's going to send 3 divisions, closer to 15,000 men, but they're going to cross this open field. And what he doesn't know is the Confederate gunners have pinpointed trees. And they have very carefully aimed their guns at these trees. They know exactly how to cut these fuses. And as soon as Union troops come toward these landmarks, they're going to open fire. So they were ready for them in broad daylight. You have Doubleday, which is composed of one of the brigades is the Iron Brigade. You have George Meade's brigade, or division, excuse me. Meade's division, Doubleday's division, and John Gibbon's division. So all 3 are supposed to launch an attack and try to drive Stonewall Jackson off of Prospect Hill. What happens, though, is at 10 o'clock in the morning, they are to step off. They're going to charge across this open field. Just before these orders are given, all hell breaks loose. All the shells start exploding all around these Union infantrymen, because right here, John Pelham, who commands Stuart's cavalry, has taken one gun, one cannon, and he opens fire on the Union flank. And everything is in disarray. And it's going to take a while for all of these Union cannon to redeploy and fire at Pelham, and they do. And Pelham is cool as a cucumber. He's going to take that one gun, he's going to move it to different places. So as soon as the Union guns find his range, he's going to move somewhere else. And for an hour, he's going to plaster the Union columns. What eventually he is going to be driven back. He runs out of ammunition, and the attack column is going to be reformed. But the problem is Doubleday is never sent forward, because so concerned is Franklin about Confederate artillery or phantom Confederate artillery that Doubleday is going to be left in position to guard that left flank. So because of this one man with one gun, you're going to have a third of the attack force is going to be denied. And so only Meade and only Gibbon are going to attack. Okay? Next, please. The Confederates have a major problem that they didn't really even realize, and that is right here. You can see Stonewall Jackson is deployed. This is A.P. Hill's sector, and you can see that there is a gap of about 600 yards. Why would anybody, A.P. Hill or Stonewall Jackson, why would they allow a gap of 600 yards right in the middle of the Confederate line? Why would they do that? Does that make any sense? No. No. It's December the 13th. It's cold, and this is a very marshy area. And so any troops that are occupying this marshy area are going to have wet feet. Do you want to have wet feet in early December when it's freezing cold? No. Stonewall Jackson, A.P. Hill understood that, and the rationale was, we're not going to subject our men to that kind of environment, so we will deploy them elsewhere, and no Yankee is going to come through that area. They're not going to get their feet wet either. So we're safe. This is a barrier to everyone. Problem is, this is Maxcy Gregg's South Carolina Brigade, about 1,500. He never tells Gregg, oh, by the way, there's no Confederates in front of you. You are basically the front line right here. And we're going to see that's a problem. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. Meade is going to step off. Gibbon is going to step off in their attack. Next, please. You can see them now attacking. Each division is composed of 3 brigades. They're going to drive, toward that area that is not ever going to be attacked. That's exactly where Meade is attacking. And they're going to reach the railroad. There's going to be some fighting along the railroad. And ultimately, they are going to drive up Prospect Hill. Next, please. As you can see, they're coming up the hill. Now, the problem with Gregg, Maxcy Gregg and his South Carolinians is, again, they're thinking, we're in the rear. There's plenty of Confederate troops in front of us. So they've stacked their weapons, and they're eating. And all of a sudden, they're hearing gunfire. And many of the South Carolinians are seeing in the underbrush, they're seeing looks like some Yankees coming up. And they grab their rifles and they start opening fire. Now, Maxcy Gregg is hard of hearing. He rides over, he says, stop, those are our men you're firing at. Do not fire. Turns out they were not his own men. They were Yankees. The Pennsylvania Reserve regiments were coming up that gap, and look what they hit next. They hit the flank, and they're going to roll that flank up. One after another one of his regiments are going to be beaten soundly and driven to the rear. And what happens to Maxcy Gregg? He takes a bullet to the side, it splits his spinal cord. He's going to die an agonizing death in 2 days. Continue, please. Well, they're not going to stop there. James Archer's mixed brigade of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia troops are on this side. They're going to be attacked the same way. Union troops are going to hit their flank. Look at the poor 19th Georgia, if there is poor. In the front, in the side, in the rear, and eventually the entire brigade is going to be defeated and driven up the hill. So in a very short period of time, 2 Confederate brigades have been not destroyed, but decimated. And you have a big hole in Stonewall Jackson's line. So what does Meade need now more than anything else? He needs reinforcements. Does he get reinforcements? No. Next, please. While he's attacking, Gibbon's division is also attacking, and remember, we're talking about 3 brigades up against Jim Lane's North Carolina brigade. It is going to hold initially, but it's going to be flanked. It's not going to be able to hold out. It's going to begin to fall back toward Dorsey Pender's brigade in the rear. Next, please. And you'll see this occurring. And next. And so we have, if you're viewing this from the Confederate side, it's a major issue. Because Archer's brigade has been defeated. Gregg's brigade has been defeated. Lane's brigade has been defeated. This is a great victory. When we think about Fredericksburg, we don't think about a Union victory, right? All we think about is death and destruction of these Union troops. Not the case. The reinforcements, though, are not coming for Meade and for Gibbon. Stonewall Jackson has lots of reinforcements, and he is not going to allow this to occur. And so he begins to bring forward a number of his regiments and brigades. Jim Walker's brigade, Eliza Paxton's Stonewall brigade, Atkinson's Georgians are all going to come forward, and they are going to counterattack. Next, please. So you can see the attack where all of these Pennsylvania Reserve units are going to begin to be pushed back. Next. A new brigade is going to come up, Thomas's Georgians. They're going to reinforce Lane and Dorsey Pender. They're going to drive Gibbon back. It's not a great situation. Next. So ultimately, what was a very promising initial attack is all going to be repulsed. Now, a problem for the Confederates is once they see victory, they don't say, hey, we drove these Union troops off of our hill. What do? Next, please. They counterattack. And so they are going to drive across, this is Atkinson's Georgians, are going to drive across this open field. And if you look at these Georgians, if you study the Battle of Antietam, who opened the Battle of Antietam? It was Douglas's brigade right in front of the cornfield. Who were they? It was Atkinson's brigade. Who commanded them at Gettysburg? John Gordon. What did they capture? Barlow's Knoll. When you look at the Wilderness, when John Gordon gets onto the flank of the Union flank, on the 6th, at the end of the 6th of May, which brigade was it? It was what was Atkins. This is a very distinguished brigade, but they are going to cross this open field and get blasted to smithereens by all of the Union artillery and counterattack next by incoming Union troops, who finally do come in, but they're coming in too late, these reinforcements. And Atkinson is going to be forced back. By the way, for those of you who have visited this battlefield, anyone know what this area is called now currently? Slaughter Pen Farm. And it is really, really special. Because if you are here, if you are driving up here, all you'll see will be factories and warehouses and airports. But right here is green, and it's protected as it should be. And that's because of the Civil War Trust, now the American Battlefield Trust. Okay, next please. So that's what happens initially. Meade and Gibbon have defeated the Confederate troops in front of them, but without reinforcements, they're forced to withdraw. What could have been a great Union victory. Imagine if 60,000 men had crossed that field. The rest of the battle would not have been waged. And you can see the differences are not that different. because of the destruction of those 3 Confederate brigades. Next, please. Well, when we think about the Battle of Fredericksburg, though, we think about Marye Heights. And you have, obviously, the Rappahannock River. In the town of Fredericksburg, you have all of these regiments that are forming. They're in the street. And what are they doing while they're in the streets? Waiting. Anyone? They're drinking. Yes. And so are their officers. What else are they doing? They are looting. They are looting in a way that is not familiar in United States history. So the Union artillery on the day before have blown this town to pieces, and now these Union troops waiting to go into battle go into a savage rampage. They are going to go into houses, they're going to pull out fine furniture, and they're going to beat it to crap. Beautiful pianos are going to be destroyed. Beautiful library books, libraries filled with books are going to be ripped to pieces. Anything and anything that has any value is going to be destroyed, and the officers basically stand by. General Patrick, who is the provost marshal, was really powerless. He was upset what was going on, but he didn't have the troops to stop what was going on. Anyway, as these troops are called into battle, they need to cross a mill race. It's a small stream. And the problem is, it's not deep, but again, you don't want to cross it with your shoes on, with your pants on, because you're going to get all wet. You're going to get sick. And so there are bridges where there are roads, but the Confederates have thoughtfully destroyed those bridges. But what it does is it concentrates the men, these attack columns, at certain areas. They're going to have to cross, again, the mill race. They're going to then charge across an open field, and right in front of them is a sunken road with a stone wall in front of it, thoughtfully manned by Thomas Cobb's Georgia Brigade, with help from Matt Ransom's North Carolina regiments. And there are a lot of other supporting regiments further up the hill. And by the way, these regiments are getting beat to heck because the Union artillery on Stafford Heights are opening fire, and anything and everything that is here is under fire from these long-range Union guns. But the Confederates have at least 9 pieces of Washington artillery on Marye Heights, and there are many, many other Confederate artillery pieces all along these heights ready for action. So this is a period description of what it looked like. Cobb's brigade behind the stone wall. Next, please. Okay. This slide, I think, really does illustrate the futility of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Are we ready? Stay with me now, please. So the first is going to be French's division, composed of 3 brigades. Do they all attack together? They're going to attack sequentially, one after the other after the other. They're all going to be beaten. Next. Hancock's division. Oh, we're going to be able to do it. 3 more brigades. 3 more brigades are defeated. Next. Howard's division. 3 more broken. Next. Sturgis. 2 more. Keep coming. Griffin, Whipple, Humphreys, Sykes, Getty's division. It's after dark. They can't see their comrades. They can see where the Confederates are. There are going to be 21 charges against Marye Heights, against that stone wall. And every single one of them is going to be repulsed. So, let's see what it looks like. Now, I'll go through this quickly. Next. Oh, we're going to have to do this. Okay. So, yeah, that's all right. If we skip a brigade, there's 20 others. So Kimball's brigade has attacked. And by the way, if you visit the battlefield, there are some distinguishing characteristics. One, you can't see this area right here because it's filled with houses. In the 1920s, 1930s, 1910s, it's all built up with houses, which is unfortunate because you can stand at the stone wall and you can see a little bit but not much. You just don't get a flavor of how terrible these charges really were. There is the Stratton House right here. It is in place today with a boarded fence around it. There is a orchard further along, and there is, you can actually see it today even though the roads have been paved, a swale. It's simply a rise in the road surface. And what we're going to see as these troops cross the field, as they are beaten back, each man has to make a decision. Do I turn and go back to Fredericksburg and maybe get shot in the back? Or do I fall in front of the swale and dig in with my hands, burrow in to try to avoid being hit by any bullet? Okay, Andrews Brigade, keep them coming now. Palmer's Brigade is going to attack and be repulsed. So not so fast. Gosh. All right, so the first division, about 1,200 men have been killed or wounded. Next, please. All right, then Hancock's division. Look, they're all attacking basically the same way. Across this open field, Zook's Brigade next. The Irish Brigade is coming next, please. And you can see the Irish Brigade attacking. They get pretty far. They get as far as this orchard. They're right in front of Philip's Legion, but they can't go any further. And those men that get this close, are all of them are killed or wounded. This handful of men. Next, please. Keep them coming. Caldwell's Brigade is going to attack. This one division loses 2,000 men. We're talking like 15, 20 minutes. Gone. Next. Howard's division, the Philadelphia Brigade is going to attack, be repulsed. Next. Hall's Brigade is going to attack and be repulsed. Next. Sully is not going to attack. For whatever reason, it basically stays right around the mill race and it gets away with it. Next. And so Howard's division loses about 1,000 men. Next. Ferrera's... Do you want me to do it? Okay. Ferrera's Brigade is going to attack. And look, by the way, how thick this band of Union troops is. Next. Keep coming. Okay, and look at Nagel. Nagel says, okay, we're not going to be able to go this way, so we're going to try to go along the flank to some degree. They're going to be defeated. Next. So loses about 1,000 men. Griffin's division, again, they're going to try across the railroad and in this direction. They're going to be defeated. Next. And Schweitzer is going to attack. It's going to be defeated. Another 1,000 men are killed or wounded. Next. Whipple's division, Carroll's Brigade, is going to attack. It is going to be repulsed. Next. Anybody know who that man is right there? That's Joshua Chamberlain, 20th Maine. He is in Stockton's brigade, and they are going to attack next. And they are coming right here. They're going to attack, and they are going to be defeated. Next. Continue. They only lose about 130 men, though. Interesting. Now, you're going to see from here on in, the losses aren't 1,000 or 2,000. It's 100 or 200. Maybe because these men are saying, you know what, this is kind of crazy. We're not going to attack as ardently as the others did before us. Next. All right, that's Stockton. Okay. Humphreys division. Now, Andrew Humphreys, you all know Andrew Humphreys, right? Andrew Humphreys becomes the chief of staff of the Union Army. He commands a division here. And this is a brand new division. And Andrew Humphreys, like so many men, He wanted glory. This was going to be his field of glory. All of these brigades had not been successful, but he was going to capture the stone wall. It didn't matter if every single man under his command was going to be killed or wounded. As long as they drove those Confederates away from that stone wall, he was fine. He's going to begin his attack next with Alabach's brigade. It's going to attack and is... Look how close it gets. Holy cow. It gets very, very close before it's pushed back. Next is Tyler's brigade. It doesn't get quite as close. 1,000 men are killed or wounded. And what's interesting is when you read Humphrey's report, his after-battle report, who does he blame for the defeat of his division? Does he blame the Confederates, those darn Confederates, because they had too many bullets? No. Does he blame his own troops because they didn't fight hard enough? No. He blames the troops right here, members of the Philadelphia Brigade. Now, Humphrey's division are all Pennsylvanians. They are green. They've never been in battle before. They were not at Antietam. They came up late. And they are crossing this swale, and imagine, you have seen charge after charge after charge, and everyone has been defeated. What would you do if a fellow Pennsylvanian, green, who has never been in battle before, is marching across your prone position? Well, what they did was they grabbed their legs and begged them not to continue. This is not something you want to do. You want to pull back or join us in the swale. And that's who Andrew Humphreys blamed. It was only the Philadelphia Brigade, those darn Philadelphians, who tried to stop us, who affected our formations. That's why we lost. Next. Next. Okay, keep it coming. Sykes' division is going to attack, as you can see over here, next. Buchanan's brigade, next. I mean, we can do this all night. Andrews' brigade, 200, keep them coming. Getty's division, Hawkins' brigade is attacking. And finally, Harlan is going to come and launch its attack. And as I indicated, it is pitch dark by this point. The only way they can see the Confederate position is by the blasts from the muzzles of these muskets on the right of the line. Next. They lose 300 men, even in the pitch darkness. Next. And so when you look at the losses, look at the lopsided nature. 7,700 men killed, wounded, some of them captured, as opposed to 1,000 men on the Confederate side. I mean, there were not very many lopsided victories or defeats such as this one. Now, okay, and so if you take all of the, you take Prospect Hill, that fight, and you take this fight, you can see how lopsided it is. Now, what do you do if you are Ambrose Burnside? You have been beaten soundly. And by the way, I should tell you that before this battle was waged, he brought all of his corps commanders and some of his division commanders, those that he trusted, he brought them together and he said, here's what my plan is. And all of them said, you're nuts. There is no way we can do this. And he actually says to them, look, he says, I don't want this job. I never wanted this job. You want me to command this army, so you need to support me. And they all reluctantly agreed. So the day after, it is the 14th of December, a terrible, terrible Union defeat. What does Burnside do? What would you do if you're Burnside? You would think that, right? He's not going to be beaten so fast. He tells his commanders, we're going to do it again. And I am going to mount my horse and I am going to lead the charge. And they said, we're done. We're not going to participate in this. You're not going to kill yourself and you're not going to kill my men. But again, if you look at the tactics, Imagine if all of these divisions had attacked en masse. And what happened at the Sunken Road? Many of these, French's division, Hancock's, which was Richardson's division, how did they attack the Sunken Road at Antietam? Individual brigades, right? And each one was defeated. And this is the next battle. Did they learn anything?
No.
No. Which really boggles the mind. So, okay. So you're not going to attack again. But Lincoln calls Burnside to Washington. It's not, hey, how are you going to go into winter quarters? It's, what are you going to do next? What is your next campaign? How are you going to take Richmond? How are you going to beat Lee? And he comes up with a plan where he is now going to try to get around Lee's, remember, this was one of his options, get around Lee's right flank. And he plans that. And so what's going to happen is in mid-January, this campaign is going to begin. It was a great campaign. It was a great strategy because Lee didn't have a whole lot of troops over on his left flank. And the movement begins. And what happens at that point? Anyone? The weather. The weather, it wasn't the Rebs, it was the weather. All hell breaks loose. It's a nor'easter. It rains, it snows, it sleets, it winds. I mean, in a very short time next, you have terrible, terrible conditions where everything is caught in the mud, aptly called the Mud March. And that is how the campaign is going to end. And it's almost a mutual decision. The Burnside is done, as is Lincoln. And who is going to replace Burnside? Hooker. Right. So what I'd like to do now, thank you. I'm going to take your seat. You know, I can explain all of this for hours, but you don't feel it, right? How many of you have seen the movie Gods and Generals? Okay. Not a well, I don't think it's a great movie, but the battle scenes I think are just fantastic. So what I want to do is illustrate, if I can, with Gods and Generals. All right? Now the sound, you may not hear it, but you don't have to hear it. It's more seeing it. The first thing you're going to see is Stockton's brigade. Stockton's brigade is going to cross the Potomac or the Rappahannock River on this pontoon bridge. And let's just go along and see. I don't know if we can turn the light off a little bit, maybe. No, I don't know what's going on. Anyway. You can see the stone wall. Oh, good, thank you. The Washington artillery are opening fire on these troops that are crossing an open field. Now, this is Stockton's men marching through Fredericksburg to get to the mill race. And that scene, they don't show enough of it to show the magnificence of those Union soldiers, the line of attack. That is supposed to be Porter Alexander. We don't have to see this part because I don't think that actually happened, but you need a little drama, right? Okay, so they're ready to go in. Again, this is the 20th Maine. This is Ames, who's going to command a brigade, unfortunately, in the Federal 11th Corps at Gettysburg. It's so interesting to see the change in Jeff Daniels from Gettysburg. He must have been exercising before the Gettysburg movie. But all right, crossing the mill race. There were still some stringers along that they could cross, but it's really going to concentrate the men. Then they're going to cross the mill race. They're going to reform into the line of battle, and they're going to advance. But I mean, there are some very nice features showing the stone wall, showing the Washington artillery, showing those attack columns. Again, you really get a pretty good flavor of what it looked like if you were about ready to attack. This is a brigade before. Stockton's brigade is going to attack. This is, I guess, Stockton's brigade moving forward. Yeah. And I'm not going to show a lot of this. I think you get the picture. But when you think about it, it's not that different from Pickett's charge in reverse. Attacking across an open field. It may not have been a mile, but it was pretty extensive. Artillery fire, blasting holes in the attack column. The attack columns attacking shoulder to shoulder. Ultimately being defeated. So it was really very similar to what happened at Gettysburg. All right, so I think you get the flavor. But it does give a pretty good idea of what it was like to be in line of battle at that particular time. Imagine being behind that stone wall and watching these troops come toward you. And ultimately, this brigade will be defeated like all of the others. So that is an overview of the Battle of Fredericksburg. And I thank you for your interest and your attentiveness. We do have plenty of books available. And if you don't buy them, we're shipping them home because they won't let me take them on the plane. But we do offer discounts. They're normally $40. We sell them for $30. We also have a new book that we self-published on Point Lookout Prisoner of War Camp, which was the largest prisoner of war camp for Confederate prisoners. Anyway, does anyone have any questions at this point? Thank you. Yes?
The 11th and 12th Corps of the Union Army weren't in this battle.
That's right.
Where were they stationed at this time?
I believe the 11th Corps was still close to Washington. And the 12th Corps probably, I think they were further south, but they were not engaged at all. Any other questions? Yes?
How did you get into map making?
By accident. I don't think there's ever a person who believes there are enough maps in any book. And I still get annoyed when I open a book. And I hate to use an example of this, but there's a history of the 121st New York. It's a very thick book. It's a great book. There's not one map in a regimental history. So I was doing a number of books on Gettysburg, the brigades of Gettysburg, the artillery of Gettysburg, roads to Gettysburg, Gettysburg tour guide, etc. And it just evolved from one project to another project to another project. And then I said, you know what? Wouldn't it be neat to have about 125 maps with a description on the facing page. And the big problem, two big problems, was one, finding a publishing house that could understand what I was trying to do, and the second was finding a cartographer who would actually be dumb enough to create 125 maps and get very little money in royalties. I mean, this is a labor of love. And so I couldn't find, I had a couple of cartographers, one who quit, one I had to fire. And I finally said to my wife, this book is never going to be published. And so as I may have indicated, she taught me, she showed me a very simple program called Freehand. It's a graphics program, and taught me how to use it. And so, you know, you can see maps, and some map makers, Jesperson and others, they are beautiful maps. You know, my maps are, I'm never going to say they're beautiful, they're functional. So that's how I got into it. And then, so once I did Gettysburg, it was, well, why don't I just continue? Because it made perfect sense. And when I think about it, I'm writing these books for my 13-year-old self. Because when I was 13, I was studying the Civil War, I didn't know what the heck was. I would read these history books, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And now, and what I really am pleased when I hear people say that they may be reading a book on Fredericksburg, you know, maybe Rabble's book or O'Reilly's book, and they have my book with it to help illustrate it. Because mine is not the definitive history, it's simply explaining the campaign in maps. It's not trying to replace O'Reilly, which is like this. It's simply showing what happened in maps, so it's much shorter in that regard. But thank you for your question. Yes?
It's just an odd question, but the Army or the engineers that were supposedly the ones making the original maps as to who was here, this was a disaster. How could you actually attempt to place these units in the exact spot?
Oh, you mean in terms of these maps?
And how did you go about putting these maps into position?
Okay, these units into position.
Right.
Okay, good question. It's reading a lot of regimental histories, but also it is the help of others. And I will be the first to admit, I don't know how many of you have been to the battlefields around Fredericksburg, but thank God for Frank O'Reilly for a variety of reasons. But he created a series of maps. A series of maps on Fredericksburg. There might be 12 of them on a sheet of paper. On Spotsylvania, there's like 24 in the series. Spotsylvania, Chancellorsville, etc. So that was very, very helpful. This wasn't that difficult because of the voluminous regimental histories. What was the problem was the wilderness. Because even though Frank would say, yeah, that unit was here, nobody really knows where those units really were. And quite frankly, nobody knows exactly where any of these units are. And I'll have people come up to me, you know, whose ancestor may have been in the 20th Maine, who wants to fight with me. It wasn't there. It was a quarter of an inch further over to the other side. And I'll say, you know what? You're right. You know, if that's what you think, it's fine. So this is trying to get into representation. I didn't want to do it at the brigade level because I thought that would be too superficial. But it is our best guess more than anything else. But if you really dig hard, you can probably question a lot of it. Yes?
What happened to Barksdale's regiments when he was ordered up?
So he's going to be repositioned on Willis's Heights, further to the south. He's not going to see action. The only unit that is in McLaws' division that sees action is Cobb's brigade, and Kershaw's brigade is going to be brought up as well. The others are basically in reserve. When you look at Longstreet's corps, the majority are not engaged because you just needed that handful of regiments and brigades to defeat these constant attacks, which were so piecemeal that they were able to do it. And the key was, could they get enough ammunition to continue to kill these innocent men who were marching forward?
Why didn't the Union stop after, say, like 10 of times?
Why did they continue charging?
I mean, why didn't he just stop?
That's a very good question. Why did the men in the 21st Brigade that attacked in Getty's division, why did they continue to attack? And there's really no answer to that. You know, we talk about men, especially early in the war, when there was the issue of honor. And if they're going to be ordered into battle, they are not going to shirk their responsibility, especially if their comrades are going to be going forward. But what I find so fascinating is when I wrote the book on the Philadelphia Brigade. Here they were at Cold Harbor, and they're ordered to attack the Confederate works. And what you find is many of these veteran Union units, they would form for the attack. They would then observe the Confederate works, and they basically would say, we're not doing it. And they wouldn't. The ones who would attack most ardently were the heavy artillery units with 1,000, 2,000 men, sometimes more, that were totally green. They would attack. And so I think later on in the war, it became more problematic. Men realizing that there's no way, and I'm not going to sacrifice myself. Good question. Thank you. Yes?
I think I can answer this question.
Okay, good.
Wasn't the rage of battle a factor? Wasn't there blood up, so to speak?
Potentially. The answer was, you know, in the heat of battle, they're trying to take a hill where so many of their comrades had been killed and wounded. It was a way to just to basically rectify that situation. Hard to say. You know, the whole issue is in battle, so many different emotions are raging, and it's hard to explain exactly why, but the outcome certainly is clear. A lot of sacrifice of innocent men because, you know, Hancock wasn't happy in sending his division, but he felt that he had to, and that was the key. They felt like they had to do it, even though they knew they were going to sacrifice these men. Was there another question? Yes.
Yeah, you talked about this a little earlier, about the 60,000 troops that were supposed to come across into the
Yes.
the slaughter pen. Do you have any other idea as to why that didn't happen? And then the other thing why is it that the Army doesn't plan better for success? So, like, if you've got something that's working, how come you don't have reinforcements?
Yes. I mean, if you think about, if this happened in 1864, if Grant was involved, I think it would have been very, very different. I don't think that it would not have been successive units charging. If you take Spotsylvania and the attack on the Muleshoe, that was a cohesive attack against this Confederate position. You saw the results.
But even that one, they didn't follow it up.
That's true, they didn't. They got to that point, but you know, they were so beaten up. They were so, their cohesiveness was so disrupted that it was hard for them to continue. There were not reinforcements behind them, and that was always the issue. There weren't enough reinforcements to take advantage of the breach. Happened with Lee at Gettysburg, when he would be successful, but didn't have troops to follow up the success. But the follow-up is, nobody really knows. Burnside never explained why it wasn't 60,000 men, why he changed his mind and did not bring up the troops that he thought.
Why didn't the general in command contact Burnside, say, clarify this, or let's wait till the following night?
Okay. That's why didn't Franklin ask for a clarification? Put yourself in the place of Franklin. Franklin, and we know this to be true because he was very clear about this, Franklin was told to expect orders that this was going to happen. And as more and more time elapsed, he got more and more frustrated. He realized the element of time was gone. It was daylight. He was so frustrated, he says, okay, if that's how incompetent Burnside is, if he says one division, I'll send this corps, but I'm not going to send any more than that, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to do the basic, because he was really ticked off. He felt that Burnside really had not done the job he should have as commander. Let me go here, and then I'll go over here. Yes.
So Burnside started the day with 125,000 troops.
ended the day with, say, 110. How many of those 125,000 were actually engaged?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd need a calculator and a piece of paper. Probably about maybe 65,000. He had a lot of troops that were never engaged or just modestly engaged that could have been thrown into battle, especially to the southern part, that could have helped with Prospect Hill. And that could have worked.
And that was his entire advantage.
Yes, there's no question about it. Yes.
My general impression is Fredericksburg is greatly underappreciated as a battle, primarily because what happened at Marye's Heights really, I think, got into all of the generals' heads, at least in the Eastern Theater for the rest of the war, in either trying to recreate that or trying to avoid that. That became a real template for a defensive, how to defend and what sort of assaults to avoid.
Yeah, I think it had the opposite impact on the Confederates. They thought, I mean, not underappreciated. The Confederates thought it was a major victory, and certainly they played it up. You still had these kinds of charges all through the war. I mean, even with, as I mentioned, Spotsylvania. You had how many thousands of men who were going to charge, or Cold Harbor, were going to charge across this open field and potentially going to be blown to bits. Now, in Spotsylvania, they had the element of surprise. So it was very early in the day before Johnson's division really knew what was happening. But Cold Harbor was a good example of, it was similar in that they are going to charge across an open field against a heavily entrenched Confederate position, and they're going to pay the price. You're going to find the same thing at Petersburg. So they learned to some degree, but there was still... You had people like Grant who, I don't want to analyze Grant, it was ending the war, and if we're going to end it, we're going to have to drive these Confederates from these positions. We're going to have to destroy Lee's army. And we may have to lose 100,000 men in doing it, but that's how we're going to end this war. If we have a campaign and we lose or we win and we stop, as had been occurring, we're never going to end this war. It's going to continue for years. And so that's what was different about Grant. Anybody else after the Wilderness, they would have stopped. They would have rested. They would have reorganized. They would have resupplied. Grant said, keep going. Spotsylvania, North Anna, Bethesda Church, Cold Harbor, Petersburg. I mean, he was going to wear Lee down, and it worked.
And yet at Petersburg, at least in the early days when Grant wasn't on site, Hancock and others squandered a golden opportunity.
Yes, they did.
Because they looked like very formidable defenses.
At Petersburg, you had a tremendous lack of coordination. You had Hancock working independently from Warren, not Sedgwick, but Wright's Corps. They were just not coordinating as they could have. And again, what happens, and it's an easy approach. It's so easy for us to sit back and say, why didn't this happen? But here we are sitting in our easy chairs, and we can see the maps, and we can see what happened. But, in the smoke of battle, and these men were exhausted. I mean, it's hard to imagine not only these foot soldiers, but also the commanders. When you got to Petersburg, the men had not rested. Hancock has this wound that continues to ooze and give them a problem. Everybody's exhausted. They're basically just going through the motions. So when you think about adequate communication, it wasn't going to happen because they're barely functioning. But Grant and Meade, it's keep attacking no matter what. And it's amazing that they were as effective as they were. But again, that's my perspective. Yes?
Two-part question.
Okay.
Why Fredericksburg? Was this something that Burnside chose?
Yes.
He wanted to cross the river in Fredericksburg in front of a urban area.
Yes.
Where sharpshooters could people, or as opposed to further north, further south.
He believed that if he could get those pontoon bridges in place, he would be able to cross before Lee was able to concentrate his army. And if those pontoons were with him and he could have crossed, he probably would have either gotten there before Lee could have, accumulated his forces, or certainly before Stonewall Jackson. So but Lincoln didn't agree with him. Halleck didn't agree with him. But after a while they said, look, you're doing us a favor essentially by commanding this army. If you think this is the best approach, we're going to let you do it. And it wasn't the best approach, yes.
So they must have learned something, because Grant used pontoons to get across the James River.
Yes.
So what transpired to make that?
I think they had the pontoons already there with the Army. I think that was the difference. Right. Earlier on in the war, they weren't using pontoon bridges all that often. I mean, they didn't need them per se at Antietam. Gettysburg, I don't think they really used them all that, I mean, around Washington. But I think they learned that they had to carry them with them. And logistics were very different later in the war, much more effective than they were early in the war, and I think that had an impact as well. Any other questions? Well, I will be around if you have any others, but thank you. I appreciate all your questions and interest.